If you're into fighting games, there are a lot of content creators that you can follow to stay up to date with the fighting game community. There are streamers, video essayists, podcasts, and match analysis channels uploading fresh content for you to tune into. And of course, if you're looking to become a better player, there are many tutorial channels that specialize in character guides and tech. But where do novice players turn to if they are ready to become intermediate or advanced players?
Get out of my mind, all of you!
A deep dive into YouTube, Reddit, and Discord servers can still yield useful information such as frame data or explanations of game-specific mechanics, but knowledge isn't everything. Eventually, you'll need to find a practical way to implement what you're learning into your gameplay in order to reap the benefits. This video is not a guide for any of these things. Rather, I would like to suggest a specific approach to becoming an intermediate player using something of an abstract metaphor. But first...
You like jazz? Perfect!
In the 1970s, jazz students at Berklee College of Music bootlegged sheet music into collections that became known as real books. Though illegal, the real book was an invaluable tool for musicians who needed to be able to play an entire repertoire worth of jazz standards at the drop of a dime, and the real book offered them a reference from which to improvise. But there is a stigma surrounding the use of real books. Here's a clip from jazz musician Adam Neely's YouTube video on the subject to help illustrate.
A few years earlier, a friend of mine was barred from playing at the Fat Cat late night jazz jam session here in New York City. He made the mistake of bringing a real book with him, and he was told he couldn't play because the Fat Cat jazz jam session was a professional jazz environment. Dickish, I know, but older jazz musicians are extremely protective of the traditional culture of learning music by ear off recordings.
Perhaps the fighting game equivalent of bringing a real book to a jam session is going to your locals and asking your opponent to pause the game at the start of the round so that you can check your character's inputs. Doing this tells your opponent that you might be free, giving them a mental advantage over you.
That's just sad.
Before taking your gameplay into a competitive environment, you'll want to have not just memorized the capability of your character, but practice them enough to have committed them to muscle memory.
I don't think really low-level casual players are improvising like jazz, I don't think they're inventing combos on the fly anyway.
The music that jazz musicians play isn't simply made up on the fly. Improvisation isn't an act of randomness, but rather is the culmination of many hours of practice. Like a musician practicing their scales, a fighting game player should routinely practice their setups and combos, or whatever tech is crucial to executing their game plan. While practicing in training mode, you may also notice flaws in your game plan, such as suboptimal team synergies or low percentage combos that require high execution in order to land. If you find that you're often dropping combos during matches, a good beginner routine would be to go into training mode and land 10 or so of your go-to combos in a row before joining the queue. After a few weeks, you should see some improvement. And if you're still not getting the results that you want, then you'll need to spend more time in training mode practicing the repetition of your combos. Learning through repetition is also called learning by rote, and it is useful if you want to turn a conscious action into a subconscious action. Rote learning does have its downsides, as rote learning alone does not provide a deeper understanding of core game mechanics, such as damage scaling. On the surface, it may seem like maximizing the number of hits in a combo would lead to greater damage, but this isn't necessarily true, which is why the next stage of learning a fighting game is of equal importance.
Jazz musicians are extremely protective of the traditional culture of learning music by ear off recordings.
As Adam Neely said earlier, jazz musicians have historically learned musical pieces by ear rather than relying on sheet music. For a musician, having a well-trained ear is of absolute importance for everything from tuning your instrument to knowing the key and chord progressions your bandmates are playing in. Without this knowledge, the musician runs the risk of hitting a sour note and ruining the performance, sort of like missing an input and dropping a combo. In fighting games, there is a similar technique to figuring out how to play: extensive trial and error. Like a musician learning the melody of a song, a fighting game player will need to learn which of their character's normals can be cancelled into specials, or linked into other normals. This can be done by going into training mode and trying every combination of moves that you can think of and taking notes on what works and what doesn't. It can be beneficial to be thorough, as it is possible that your character has options that are unique to them. Furthermore, it is worth learning how to manipulate the options in the training mode in your game of choice in order to emulate particular desired scenarios. This can be helpful to train against the specific things that you struggle against in your online matches. While making this video, I came across another by YouTuber WrathFGC.
This is a very slow process. Actually going in training mode and trying to figure everything out from scratch on your own is very slow.
And it's worth reiterating now that this video is for competent beginners who are looking to become intermediate players. It's important that beginner players still learn the basics of the game they're playing.
Few things are more boring than having to practice your scales, which is why in the early 19th century the etude became popular.
An etude is a short, usually difficult piece of music written with the intention of teaching technique within the context of actually playing a song. If you had ever taken piano lessons in your youth, you are probably familiar with the etude. You are also probably familiar with this book, Hanon's The Virtuoso Pianist in 60 Exercises. I would bet that most musicians would agree that it is more enjoyable to play an etude than the linear, mechanical, and unmusical exercises in Hanon's book. In the same way, I would assume that most beginner fighting game players would find playing against actual opponents more enjoyable than going into training mode to repetitively execute combos. This is why I would recommend taking your practice into the online queue as early as you are comfortable with doing so. Even earlier than that if you're willing to undergo your ego death. But don't go in with winning as your goal, rather with the goal of incorporating an aspect of your time in training mode into the match, such as landing one or two of the combos that you've been practicing, to spot dodge all incoming projectiles rather than blocking them, or to anti-air your opponent whenever they jump in at you. Whatever aspect of your gameplay that you're trying to improve in the moment. More than just matches being more fun than training mode, matches are where what you learn in training mode becomes applicable. After all, the ultimate goal is to be able to use what you've learned against strong opponents. To complete the analogy, fighting games are music. The game is the song, the matchup is the key that the song is in, your opponent is your bandmate, normals are notes, specials are chords, and your controller is your instrument. In this way, fighting games are jazz, and you can learn to play them like a jazz musician. Spending time in training mode and figuring things out for yourself is a large part of developing a game's meta. When Lord Knight says this about the snapback meta in Dragon Ball FighterZ,
people started snapping more. Nakil was a very, very good player who was doing this. JP players weren't doing this so much. I don't really know what EU was doing at the time. People started saying, hey, isn't Piccolo actually like a really, really, really good character? And one of the reasons was because of this.
He references what players in their respective regions were doing with the game, because a game's meta is developed in regions before being brought to tournaments. Practice your combos, learn to utilize the training mode to discover new techniques and ways to counter the things that you struggle against, and remember that in the long run, fighting games favor legacy skill, and the time spent in one game will transfer to the next that you decide to play.